handle it. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're so happy to have you here with us today. I'm Leslyn Keith with Lipedema Simplified, and I'm here doing this live with Allie Houston because we want you to meet the speakers that are going to be at our upcoming event happening on April 17 to 19 virtually. And Allie is one of our speakers there. Let me introduce you to Allie. He is a PhD candidate, and I'm looking for my notes here. He is a PhD candidate at the University of Oxford Department of Psychiatry, where he's running a randomized controlled trial testing a ketogenic diet plus coaching for adults with ADHD and associated depressive symptoms. He's supported by the Bazooki Group and crowdfunding donors. His work sits at the intersection of metabolic psychiatry, behavior change, and scalable digital support. Allie is also the founder of a metabolic mental health digital platform focused on the connections between food and mood. Formerly a physicist, he brings a practical, evidence-based lens to translating metabolic approaches into real-world mental health and care. Welcome, Allie. You're so happy to have you here.
Thanks, Leslyn. Yeah, it's been a while since we've spoken, but yes. I love the organization that you're part of, and very happy to be involved with the meeting.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you because you bring such an important part. Sometimes something that's not often talked about in the world in general, but specifically with lipedema, we tend to often focus on the physical symptoms. And the person is not just made up of their physical self. We really need to talk about the mental health and deal with the whole person. And you bring such a unique perspective, kind of the intersection between nutrition and mental health, that is so very much needed. And it's amazing how much the impact of what we eat has on our mood and our mental health. So we're thrilled to have you here to talk about what you're going to talk about at the conference, but also your fantastic work that you're doing. I alluded to that your PhD work that you're involved in. Can you tell everybody a little bit about what you're doing with that?
Yeah, so the PhD work is a kind of culmination of what happened to me 10 years ago, almost exactly, when I decided to try a ketogenic diet. And it was really to try to control my weight, which I'd struggled with for some years. And, you know, it worked for my weight, but to my happy surprise, my mood and anxiety kind of improved massively. I'd had serious seasonal depression where, you know, I'd had suicidal ideation in the past. I had, you know, chronic anxiety, and I'd been diagnosed with ADHD in 2015. Mm-hmm. But I was really just trying to lose weight, and all of those mental health symptoms cleared up pretty much totally within 2 to 3 weeks. I felt amazing. So I was trying to work out why that might have something to do with diet. And at that time, there wasn't many people talking about it. Georgia Ede is a psychiatrist who was talking about it at the time. And then some kind of esoteric blogs talking about how fat is good for mitochondria and that kind of thing. And I was trying to piece it all together. And so doing this PhD randomized controlled trial really came from asking the question, well, was it food that helped my mental health? And if so, what, you know, how? And so what we're trying to do with the study at Oxford is get 100 people and give 50 of them a ketogenic diet, and we coach them to do it themselves at home, and 50 people to be coached to do another diet, which we think might help them a bit, but we don't know either way. And so we're testing them against each other. And because we're randomizing people with ADHD and symptoms of depression into one diet or another, we'll really be able to see, if there is a big enough effect, we'll be able to say, well, with some certainty that that a ketogenic diet can cause improvements, right? Because that's an open question about why I got better. When I was a physicist and I was working in a laser factory, sometimes if something went wrong with the laser, or if it got better having had something wrong with it, we would just sort of sometimes say, well, it was probably just cosmic rays if we couldn't work it out, and we were just joking. It was like a nerdy physicist joke, that it was just sort of radiation from space. But there's an element of truth. It could have been. There's a sort of 1 in a million shot. And so similarly with the diet, yes, I got better from symptoms I'd had for probably 25 years by then, but it doesn't mean that it definitely was the diet that caused it, right? So I'm quite careful about saying this causes that until we've done science. And so I'm privileged to be able to do that science to work out, what happened to me.
Right. And there's a lot of pitfalls when we try to do nutrition studies. It's, first, how do you design it? Then how do you make sure that people are doing the prescribed way of eating? There's a lot of variables that come in there. But even with all of that, it seems like a lot of the studies coming out that are testing a ketogenic diet still seem to have good positive results, even though we know that it's very difficult to run those studies. Are you able to say what the comparison diet will be?
Yes, so it's called the hormesis diet. And the idea is that there's something called a hormetic effect, or hormesis, which means that when something damaging stresses the body, that it's bad for the body in the short term, but it can be beneficial in the medium to long term. So, this idea that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, or that it actually builds resilience. And so this is sometimes seen and talked about with things like polyphenols and various other plant compounds that cause some sort of stress, but then apparently make it stronger. And there's bold claims made online about this, but really there's not great evidence in either direction. So we've named it the hormesis diet because if somebody Googles it, then they're going to probably not unreasonably think, well, this might help me. And that's a great placebo, because there's bound to be a placebo effect with ketogenic diet. Because if you Google ketogenic diet mental health right now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that, it makes people's limbs regrow and that kind of thing. So, there's just a lot overclaimed about ketogenic diets at the moment. So we need a good placebo so that people believe it. And really, the hormesis diet, it may well help people, right? And I actually think that it probably will. The basis of it is the Eat Well plate, which is similar to the former USDA guidelines. So the former food pyramid, where you have starchy carbs, fresh fruit and veg, and a small amount of lean protein, a small amount of fat, that kind of thing. And that's probably already a lot better than most people eat already. So
and so it's probably in the hormesis diet, you're having them avoid ultra processed foods and that type of thing. So they're going to go for whole fresh foods. And so I would say that is going to be an improvement. Yes.
Yeah, I think so. And so I think it's a fair fight, and we'll just have to do it this year and see what happens.
Yes. I think that there is something huge to be said for your mindset going in. And if you believe that a ketogenic diet is going to be better than the alternative diet, and then you get put into the other group, that can really affect your responses. So you be able, coming up with something that hopefully the participants can believe in both diets and maybe give an accurate picture of what's happening in them. And I'm sure you're going to have both objective and subjective measurements, because there's so much subjective that can happen in a study and that can really color your results. So, but I think we need to have all that subjective information as well to really make it a rich, well-rounded study. Can you speak to what you're going to be using for your measures?
Absolutely. So the primary outcome is a self-reported ADHD symptom scale called the ASRS Part A. So that's the best validated part. There's a Part B as well that we will be taking, but the primary outcome is the any change in the ASRS Part A for ADHD symptoms between baseline when they first start the study and after 16 weeks when they finish the study. So they get 16 weeks of coaching. And then there's lots of secondary outcomes, including PHQ-9 for depression, GAD-7 for anxiety. These are also self-reported scales, so it's just like questionnaires that you answer at home, which have their flaws, but they should be hopefully self-consistent to the person and across the study in a way that we can analyze meaningfully, and they're widely used. There's some interesting baseline data we're taking. For example, the ACEs questionnaire, so the Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it'd be interesting to see how response to a ketogenic diet stratifies to whether someone scores highly on the Adverse Childhood Experiences questionnaire. It'll be optional, so we might not get complete data on that, but I think that will be interesting. We're also taking data on disordered eating, because I think there's accusations that ketogenic diet could actually even constitute an eating disorder from some people, and that it suspicion that it might fuel disordered eating or eating disorders. And so the EDEQ will be given at the start and at 6 weeks and at the end, and other questionnaires like the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, the Work and Social Adjustment Scale, which is kind of how you're coping with life and how your work is going. The Big Five inventory, which is about psychology, right? Like your personality. Does that change with the other stuff? That'll be really interesting, I think. And then there's a more subjective qualitative data gathering at the end of the study, which is optional. So if people opt in, then they will have a 30-minute or so interview about how they felt about the intervention. And so this is where a lot of the really interesting data has been captured in previous studies, where people use very vivid metaphors about how much better they feel. And it's like, this is where a lot of the work translates properly to the wider public, because it's one thing to say on the ASRS Part A scale for ADHD symptoms, it went from a number to another number. But what does that mean to someone? So when I've worked with people in the past, they've said things like the clouds parted and the sun shone through, or various metaphors that just really that bring it across a lot more powerfully. So there's that, and then we're doing lots of blood markers. So we're going to be measuring a lot of the usual lipid panels for people who are concerned about heart disease risk, and that obviously pertains to people's metabolic health. And we'll also be measuring daily ketones and glucose. So an objective measure of whether they were adherent to the diet, and both diets actually, because in the hormesis diet, although they could be going off piste and having lots of junk food, and still measuring zero on their ketones. What we will see if they're taking their ketone measurements is if they do go into ketosis on the hormesis diet, they're not doing the hormesis diet correctly, because it's based on starch and carbs. And so that's a nice objective marker of at least they didn't start a ketogenic diet. Because if you look at ketogenic diet studies in the past, where there was a control group you just don't find that they measured ketones.
Mm-hmm.
So in the control group, and so that is vital data, right? If you're in a diet study, it's quite likely that you probably start restricting calories or fasting or
Mm-hmm.
messing around in a way that you can't, unless you're in a
Yes.
ward or a prison, you can't
Right.
really see what people are eating. So
Right.
we can ask them to take photos and stuff, but they still might be sneaking donuts, or they still might be, whatever it is.
Yes.
And so to have an objective marker like blood ketones and blood glucose is
Yeah.
super useful. So the list goes on, but it's we're quite happy with the level of measurement.
Yeah, that sounds it's going to be wonderful. One other thing I wanted to ask you about is this going to be in person? Do people need to live and participate, near Oxford in order to be in the study?
So we're going to be recruiting via social media because we don't want people to realize it's a keto study, jazz
Okay.
hands, because then the sort of equipoise, as they say, between the two diets is
Hmm.
somewhat lost,
Hmm.
and might be disappointed if they're randomized into the hormesis diet.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so we need them all to enthusiastically participate in whatever
Hmm.
diet they're given. But it's in the UK, so it's people who are in the UK who have a
Okay.
previous diagnosis of ADHD and who see this advert and click on the link. And so they
Okay.
need to have had a previous ADHD diagnosis and still have symptoms of ADHD and at least mild symptoms of mild depression. So they don't need to have had a diagnosis of depression in the past. So we'll be targeting people who are close enough to one of these clinics. So there'll be
Right.
several cities in the UK that are
Okay.
targeted. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. And I'm so happy to hear about that. And I really look forward to how that research goes. It looks like we have a comment here from Lori. Sounds interesting. Love the ketogenic lifestyle. Doing a N=1 dairy elimination this month to see if I can get some better outcomes. And so looking forward to the heart to heart and for Ali's study. Will there be any segmenting by ApoE4 carrier status? Okay, we're getting high level here now.
I know. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I feel like dairy about dairy, like Mark Twain felt about cigarettes. He said, "Quitting smoking is easy. I've done it hundreds of times." And
Right, right.
I used to smoke, so I feel like that way about
Yeah.
cigarettes as well. But I definitely feel that way about dairy, and I haven't touched dairy really for a few years. Occasionally, maybe, but it's just not worth it for me. And there's so many individuals who end up going down that route, and it's funny because it's like a darling of online keto, and you go
Mhm,
on to a lot of groups, and they're like, just eat as much cheese or cream or butter as you like,
mhm,
and there's a lot of people now. I mean, a large fraction of people who I've worked with who just do better without dairy.
mhm,
So there's all sorts of potential explanations for that. But if you feel like it, if someone feels like it might be an issue, then it probably is. And yeah, uh, some people can do okay once in a while with it. Other people, they're fine with butter, but not with cheese or cream. It
mhm,
just, it depends. But people often feel amazing if they get rid of it when they're
mhm,
keto. And
mhm,
on the ApoE4 question, we're not measuring that, but yeah, it's a very interesting question. And for anyone who doesn't know, ApoE4 is studied around uh, Alzheimer's risk. And my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and
mhm,
I have one of the copies of the ApoE4 gene. So I am, when I got my 23andMe done, I saw that. And therefore, I'm very interested in this. And one area I'm looking at a lot is the glymphatic system, which
yes,
presumably you look at a lot too, given that it's part of the lymphatic system. It's just in the head and
great.
neck,
Yes.
and it seems like it's implicated in the inability of some people to clear old proteins from the brain. And this is a
Mhm,
hallmark of some dementias, is
mhm,
is the presence of proteins that shouldn't be in the brain anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I personally, I mean, there's nothing I can do about my genes, right?
Right.
There's epigenetic signaling
Right.
where you've got the one script, but it's spoken in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that described as like, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet versus that, whoever it was, Fellini's one. Same script, right? Very
Yes.
different films.
Yes. Yes.
So it's the same with our genes. Like, they're not our destiny. But how do we make the ApoE4 gene not matter as much? And
Right.
we don't have super definitive answers because it's hard to run studies that last for 30 years so that you can
Mm-hmm.
see whether people develop dementia or not with a particular intervention.
Mm-hmm.
There's just, some people are calling dementia type 3 diabetes, and there's clearly a link to the glymphatic system. And
Yes.
there's all of this great stuff that you guys do on, fascia and on connective tissue and lymphatic drainage, and
Right.
that I'm sure it's linked, and that we can't change our genes. But me personally, who's skin in the game for ApoE4, I stick to a ketogenic diet, and I do lymphatic massage. I try to get exercise where I am moving around, and yeah, I think it's a good idea to keep an eye on that. I also think it's one of the reasons why things that are sometimes considered a bit left of center or woo, like acupuncture or certain types of massage, and then the pairing technique has more mainstream sway, but it's still on the fringe. Sometimes they have really profound effects on people.
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
lymphatic touch and all of that is profound and can really help mental and neurological health.
Yes, yeah, and that's tremendous that you are onto that, because, I mean, the lymphatics in your head and neck of the brain has a huge impact on mood and mental health, and it does deliver nutrients as well as remove waste, and you can see how that's going to be so important to brain health, which is mental health. So I thank you for making that connection. But I would like to talk a little bit before we finish up here is what you're going to be doing at our virtual event that's happening April 17 to 19. So you're going to be on a panel with mental health experts, and we're talking about specifically diet and mental health. That is, I mean, in your work the last several years, you've had that digital platform trying to help people with mental health issues using nutrition. And so you and several of the speakers are going to be talking specifically about that issue. It sounds like from the comments that people really want you to talk about your study that you're proposing and what you hope to find out and discover. But what else do you think that you'll bring up while you're on that panel?
I mean, the question that comes up again and again is kind of, how do I apply this knowledge? There's a lot of discussion about potential mechanisms of how it might work. I think, and the sort of academic side is to do the randomized controlled trials, right? Because there's been a couple of very promising pilot studies and a sort of exploratory randomized controlled trial that was quite short, but did have a positive result on depression. And the bigger ones are on the way. Now, I think even the most conservative doctors and academics that I speak to think that there is an effect here, that
Yes.
they just don't. We can't quantify it yet properly for who does it work for and why, right? And we need to quantify that, because we need to work out who it's not working for, and then see if we can make it work for them by understanding what the mechanisms are.
Right.
Now, this isn't a straightforward thing, because ketogenic diets do multiple things throughout the body, and this is seen in epilepsy research, where ketogenic diets have been used since the 1920s, and so neurological health and mental health are very linked. The sort of the way that there's no difference between a neurological neuron and a psychiatric neuron, right? It's your brain.
Yes.
And so the expression of these illnesses are sort of, it can be seen as variants, I guess. I mean, the way that they happen can be quite different, but it shouldn't be surprising, at least, that ketogenic diets, if they sometimes completely stop seizures in people with epilepsy, which they do, should be applicable to mental health. And so, these are the kinds of questions that I'm trying to answer at the moment. For whom does it work well, and for whom does it not work, and why? And then we can start to adapt it to see if either we can, create a version that does work for those people, or move on to other modalities that can definitely, more likely at least, help them.
Right.
Because I think there's a lot of ways into poor mental health. We're doing the Adverse Childhood Experiences questionnaire. People can be upset because they already have an illness, right? And lipedema is a perfect example. It can be depressing to be ill, and so the biopsychosocial model of mental illness is that there's biological component, psychological component, and social components, and that just doing keto isn't going to solve them all at one fell swoop. So I think all of these talking points come up when discussing ketogenic diets for mental health, and I guess with all that going on, the role that I see for myself is to just try to help people to try it. As I say, it's been used for more than 100 years in epilepsy. There doesn't seem to be anything particularly unsafe about it, right? There's people who wring their hands about potential problems, and it's not necessarily full ketogenic diets, but certainly Dr. David Unwin in the UK has been using low carb and ketogenic diets for more than 10 years successfully, and his data is pretty clear that across the board risk goes down for heart disease, for kidney disease, for people's weight. And so the idea that it's somehow risky or dicey to do it long term just doesn't really stack up. All of that to say, I really want to help people to just give it a try, and empower them to do that, and get the information to them that will allow them to do it.
Yeah, and support them in making adaptations that work well for them to make it sustainable for them. So considering all their other comorbidities, considering their culture, any of those things might need some adaptations that could still very well be a ketogenic diet, but they need support and help to be able to make those changes and individual to them, which ultimately makes it more sustainable. And you brought up Dr. Unwin, who's been doing this in his practice. Well, we have a physician who's been doing it in her practice with lipedema for over 15 years. And it's sustainable, it's safe. And she does try to make it individualized for each of her patients. So there's people out there doing it, and it certainly can be done long-term safely. It is so wonderful to have you here and have this discussion, Ali. I really look forward to what you're going to be saying on the panel at our event. April 17 to 19. There's a link down below so you can register. And also, I believe that Allie, your social media link is also down below if people want to connect with you. Thank you so much for being here today. It's just wonderful to talk to you.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to being part of the event, which is brilliant and so vital. And I'm active on X, formerly Twitter. So if you do want to ask anything follow up, then I'll be there. And otherwise, I'll see you at the event.
Great, thank you so much. See everybody soon, I hope. Bye-bye.